Okay, hello again, everyone. It's Larry Gordon at the Five Towns Jewish Times with our regularly scheduled podcast on pertinent issues of the day. And this is our second in hopefully what's going to be an endless series of these types of broadcasts. So we're very privileged to have in our studio today Andy Lauber, who is the Director of Community Relationships for Chai Lifeline, and also the overseer. Is that a
Whatever.
overseer of iShine,
yes,
which is a popular and very fascinating aspect of the types of services that Chai Lifeline provides for the community, for the international community. It's not limited to the area we're sitting in now, which is in Nassau County in the Five Towns, but really seriously, it's a global endeavor, and it's made a tremendous impact on the Jewish community around the world. And we'll get into some of the details of some of that in just a few moments. Andy lives here in the Five Towns, born and raised though where?
Queens.
In Queens, New York. So you're a New Yorker.
Through and through.
You know, Andrew Cuomo territory, Donald Trump territory.
Sure.
You probably didn't know those
But
guys
Jamaica
growing up.
States. They both were
Right.
They have their stomping grounds.
Okay, so I mean, Queens apparently produces tough people.
Yeah.
You know, and you have to be up to whatever task is assigned to you. Now, of course, this is going to be up online on our website and on YouTube for eternity. But as it applies to what's happening now, next week, a week after this day, we're recording this on Tuesday, December 1st. On December 8th is first of a kind, really. It's an annual Chai Lifeline dinner, so to speak, without the dinner, though, right? Andy is a social worker, LMLS. How's it go again?
LMSW, right? CSW is
LMSW.
Yeah.
Oh, I attached the M and the S into my notes. I couldn't read that. LMSW. So he's a social worker, and he has his finger on the pulse, yes, of a very complicated community. But let's start with iShine. I know what iShine does. Our readers know that, of course, my daughter, Malki, who's one of the honorees at this year's event, lost her husband almost 20 months ago, and she has 5 young kids. The oldest is 13, the youngest is 3, and iShine has made an extraordinary difference over the last 20 months for them. But interestingly, I'll let you talk in a minute, but interestingly, I have a friend who's, he's probably around 50, early 50s these days, and he says his father passed away suddenly when he was 10 years old. He lived here in New York. He says there was absolutely nothing. He was an only child, and it was just quiet. There was nothing. So a lot, and that must have been 40 years ago, so a lot changed, right?
That's an understatement, yeah, for sure.
So what would you say, what were the steps that, obviously there was a need for it, but what would you say is the evolution of that very dramatic change?
So, it's an excellent question. I mean, I think it really goes back to even with Chai Lifeline to, if we just take the word, it's a cancer. So I'm sure you remember not that long ago, it was only called Yenamachla.
Right.
No one even said the word cancer.
Yeah, right.
It was like a taboo, we don't say that.
Yeah.
And we not only have quote-unquote mainstreamed it, but we've made it acceptable. So much so that we've been in schools from most modern Orthodox or conservative reform through Chassidish schools that would never ever allow anyone to come in to talk about such a thing. And now it's not only acceptable, it is welcomed. So it began way back when, and as we began to get more involved with families, we start to realize very simply that illness affects everyone. Mm-hmm. Everyone in the family is affected in one way or another. And we need to provide services and care for each family member. And the only way to do that is to be able to really understand the needs. So when we started looking at siblings, and we started to say, like, wait a second, here's a whole population of children growing up that either have a sibling that's ill, and then we started to expand to realize it's not just a sibling that's ill, obviously it's a parent that's ill, or God forbid, a parent who passed away. And these are a very vulnerable population because very often they can be looked at very much, you can pass them right by. Here you have these after school hours that are very crucial. And in life in general, everyone's focused on either the ill child or the parent that's ill, or just the overall needs, let's say, of the assignment, but they can miss out on such crucial points of a child's life.
So, as a social worker and deeply involved in this effort, let's explore the dichotomy between what it's like for a child that has a sibling that's ill versus a child who loses a parent.
Okay, so
what are the different types of traumas how do you address
obviously, there's so many different layers. When you have a child who is diagnosed, let's say, or a sibling that's diagnosed, and you're obviously at specific ages, every age needs to be given over appropriate information to their specific age so they be able to understand and grasp as to what's going on. But children crave stability, and they need to know that, and I can tell you from situations where I've done interventions through Project Chai, where if you're talking to, let's say, a younger child, a 7-year-old, and Nebuch, someone passed away, their concern is, who's taking me off the bus? Mm-hmm. We're thinking global. They're focused on, well, till today, like, my mommy always took me off the bus, so like, when I get from school, who's taking me off the bus?
Very practical.
Very concrete, very practical,
approach.
Because that's how they look at the world.
Mm-hmm.
As you get older, obviously, it becomes more challenging, and there are different needs, but you have to be able to understand the needs of the child. So children crave stability, so we need to be able to provide that stability for them. They need to have that support, they need to have that nurture. And every situation obviously is different, but it's also very important to recognize the age differences and how a child reacts. When it comes to having a sibling that's ill, so we have to recognize if a sibling is now going to be, let's say it's an illness of cancer or any type of rare illness where there's going to be a lot of medical needs, there could be lots of changes that will happen now in that family, whether it be in the home, whether they're going to have to go outpatient or inpatient. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the dynamics that they were used to are also now going to be completely flipped over. And they're going to need a lot of support. And parents have to learn how to navigate this new reality. But also these kids have to understand. Now, very often, there's a large feeling of guilt. Of, I'm healthy. The siblings saying, I'm healthy, I'm well, I'm healthy, mm-hmm. I'm good. How could I complain? How could I say anything? After all, my brother, my sister, someone, they're going through such difficult time. My parents are so overwhelmed. I'm going to say something. Meanwhile, they're craving positive attention. They're craving that. They just did something very colossal in school, or they're having challenges with their peers, but they don't feel they can talk to anybody about it. Or they're just going through their own difficulties of trying to understand what's going on and their own fears. So when that happens, they need to know how to be addressed. When it comes to loss, so obviously loss is very, very challenging. You have the acute loss, the immediate concerns of recognizing the impact that it takes on everyone. And of course, there's the long-term impact. Very often, as you know, and as everyone knows, when something happens, a lot of people rally around. And usually Shiva and all these times are extremely overwhelming. But you also have to know how to navigate those times and how to provide for those children appropriately and properly and recognize their needs. And we have so many questions that come in through Project Chai during those acute times because you're not thinking clearly. And no one's ever told you, like, this is what you should do. How are you supposed to know what to do? And all of a sudden, here you are, and you need to get answers now because it's very pertinent. And at this time, is crucial for these children.
And this starts at the moment that the crisis occurs.
Correct.
Someone.
But even before,
in a car accident,
right, so
or from an illness.
There's different types. We have sudden illness. So excuse me, we have sudden passing. In other words,
right.
God forbid a tragedy, something that was, something that happened without any warning, and then you have something unfortunate where someone was ill.
So there's a big difference, probably.
Very big difference. Very different trauma. When you have someone who's ill, even though it's painful, there is some sort of preparation that someone can go through, and even though it doesn't take away the pain necessarily, but the shock part, and there still might be shock, but in your head you've already somewhat prepared yourself, depending on your age, obviously. You have a certain backdrop to fall on. When it's, God forbid, a sudden death, it changes everything. And who's telling you that over to you? Who's giving you over that news? Every little detail is important. How it's said, how it's given over, what is being said, and then follow up. So after the Shiva, and you, as we all know, very often what happens is people go on their merry way.
Right.
And yes, if you have a good family support and people that care and people that are involved, so that's wonderful.
It strikes me that when you were talking about the trauma and how people react to it, not that it's decades apart, but not that dissimilar to people who are from families that survived the Holocaust, for example. I mean, literature is still being produced about an event that ended almost 80 years ago. But we hear from family that is elderly today but managed to survive, and their children and even grandchildren, that the main feature of that survival was absolute silence.
Yeah.
I know that the war ended in 1945, let's say, and not a word was uttered until it became popular in the 70s or 80s to even talk about it. So that's I guess that's a natural human.
Yeah, absolutely. That was extreme trauma.
To suppress the trauma.
So it's some of the strongest coping mechanisms.
So it's not a good idea to suppress trauma.
So what happened? So look at people, the next generation, right? So you have different types of, like my grandparents were pretty much all survivors. My Babi Alai Shalom, she never left the war. She would talk about it as if it was yesterday. My Weiss Babi was just recently nifter, and she was in Auschwitz, but not a word. Occasionally, we would talk maybe here and there. I bring up something. Otherwise, she rarely spoke about it. But she was an amazing woman, as if you would not know if you didn't know her personally. So everyone responds to trauma differently, obviously, and everyone relates and is able to process things differently. But we've found that obviously when you go through difficulties, the more you learn how to process it, when to process it, where to go with all these mixed emotions that you have. And grieving is some of the most difficult emotions a person can go through. There's not necessarily a rhyme or reason how a person grieves. Everyone can grieve differently. You could have a husband and wife completely grieving differently. You can have children in the same family grieving differently. And it can cause a lot of strife because you don't understand me.
So that post-World War II reaction of complete silence was probably the conventional wisdom of all trauma going forward. If you had a death in the family or an ill spouse or a child, you were basically alone and you had to deal with
Right.
whatever the situation was presenting to you. No one wanted to hear about it.
Absolutely.
You had to be
But
quiet.
that trauma also was extreme. And very often, what I found, just with my own life, is that because it was such extreme trauma, just to even bring up that trauma very often caused more trauma. And what would happen was, I didn't want to bring it up for either the well-being of myself, because it was just too painful, and I didn't have anyone to process it with it, or, and this I saw openly very often, it caused secondary trauma.
A person, what they do, they react,
Or
they call act up, so to
Or
speak.
for that matter, the people who are there. In other words, the siblings, the children, who are now living in that home, who are themselves traumatized because their parent is reenacting what happened, and I can't process it, and I don't know what that is, and the pain that they're feeling, I'm not feeling, but I'm hurt, and I don't know how to process that myself either. And then if it's continuous, it almost takes on a life of itself. And then in those days, you didn't have necessarily the specialist to be able to deal with this. And as you said, very often it was just like, okay, it's just too much, let's just not talk about it.
So let's talk a little bit about iShine and how the organization has grown.
Sure.
And how has it adapted to function in the new age of the coronavirus, which requires social distancing.
Absolutely,
and,
been very, very
and
complicated.
masks,
Yes.
and so on and
Yes.
so forth.
Yes.
So first of all, tell me about the global reach of iShine.
So iShine started out here.
Started here in New York.
No. 5 towns.
How long ago?
2007. It
Okay.
started here.
14
And
years
It was actually, there's a woman named Annette Kaufman who lives in the neighborhood, lives in Woodsburg. And there's another woman named Stacy Zrian who lives in Lawrence. And there was a third woman at the time named Dina Intrator. Dina's now moved on, and now we have other women who've come to join us. Sherry Hammer, Rebecca Mansbeck, and Natalie Hiller is one of the honorees. So really Annette had this idea, and she is a creative genius, but she could not implement the idea. She needed to go to Stacy Zrian, who's an organizational queen.
So what was that original
Okay,
idea?
she saw that this is a need, that there are families that are struggling, that have a sibling that's ill, who themselves can't process it, and they're so overwhelmed that it's causing such emotional distress that they need desperate help. And she saw something really extreme, and she said, this needs to be done. This needs to be cared for, and we need to explore this, because I'm certain that there are other people going through this. Now, Chai Lifeline always had programs for siblings. We always had sib shops and things that constantly, but this was revolutionary, because here it was, we're going to make an after-school program, and we're going to start doing it twice a week. Once they came to us, right, actually went through Zahava Fireman, because they were friendly, Stacey was friendly with Zahava, who said this is a brilliant idea. She came to her with a scholar, liked the idea a lot, came to me, and said, make it happen. So that's how pretty much it happened, and then we sat together, and we brainstormed, and we came together realizing that we need to create this program. Now what's actually interesting is, I went to some of the families in town that we're working with and said, if I was to open up a program, what were some things you would need for you to be able to send your child here? What would be something that you would enjoy? What is something that's important? And we went to a specific family who had a kid that was going through serious treatments, and she had twins, and she said to me, you know what, if I have to do another carpool, there's no way it's going to happen. It's just, I'm already overwhelmed. I'm ready to pull my hair out as it is. So if you're going to make this program, but I'm going to have to carpool back and forth, we're out. So that was number one. I said, okay, we have to provide transportation. And that's the beauty of the 5 towns. Because we literally put it out, and within days, we had people responding, I'm in, I can help. We then went to different schools. First we started within Chai Lifeline's basic database of families that we're already servicing, and then we went to the schools, and we sat with the social workers and the principals and said, listen, this is what we're planning on doing. And they said, it's brilliant, we love it. You know, all the principals gave me a lot of...
So what happened after New York? What was the next stop?
Next stop after New York, after here, after 5 times, we went to Teaneck, in Noam over there in Teaneck. And then we went to Chicago, into Los Angeles, into Miami. It just, any community that has challenges, where they have people that are living with illness or loss, this is a need that it's so obvious.
So how many families would you say you're servicing?
In total,
currently?
Between all the programs, don't forget we also have a Chassidish program.
Right.
In Borough Park, in Williamsburg, in Muncie, in Monroe.
How does the Chassidish program differ from...
Right, it's exactly the same as after.
Chassidish program.
No, I'm kidding. It's...
How they differ?
It's a Chassidish program. It's actually an excellent question. You know why? Because we could tweak the needs to fit every community. The Chassidim get out late during the week. The little kids and at school like at 7:30 sometimes.
Really?
Yeah, they're not getting home till who knows what time.
Really?
So there's not...
Talk about 10, 11-year-old kids?
They're getting home at 7:30, sometimes even later,
So
depending on the age. So we do it Sundays for them, because they get out earlier, like at 3, you know? So they're this way, and we're not doing homework over there. We're doing different types of proactive activities. They learn different people picked up
They don't have
instruments.
Homework.
Yeah, I'm sure they have homework. Maybe not, maybe yes.
All right, they do it in school.
Exactly, or on the bus,
Right.
as every kid does.
Right.
So what ended up happening was that we were able to create this, and then that exploded. Once that program, just in that area alone, we have over 300 and I think with 350 something kids I looked at last. Just by the Chassidish program over there.
In the New York area?
Just in that New York area over here. Over between. In the 5 towns, right now we have 53.
The families are very large.
Yes, they're larger families, and we can't even take everybody.
And you're dealing with siblings.
Right, so we can't even take every single kid over there, because you're right, Ayla never saw it. We'd have 500.
Right.
So we have to do certain ages that are appropriate. We can't do too young, and we're not going to take too old. So it's certain ages only that we're working with them.
I mean, like I said, it's a great thing. I know in the olden days before pre-corona, you picked up the kids from school.
Right, so we had...
brought them to a central location.
Yes.
You fed them dinner.
We took care of everything.
And
Snack,
they had a good time. Till
dinner.
To what time? For, I guess, it was
The
2
moment they got,
hours.
the younger kids were there at 3:45, 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
The older kids got there a little later because they got out of school later. We went from 3:45 to 6:30.
Wow.
So we provide everything. Our goal is A to Z. A parent should know that these 2 days a week, everything's going to be cared for. And that is that they get there, they get snack, they get homework help, we have mentoring, we have social workers to work with them. They have awesome activities that create beautiful, beautiful friendships. We have dinner, and after that, we either do a raffle of some sort, but then they're driven home. So the parent knows they had dinner, they got their homework done, and they became friends with other kids who are going through similar situations and they can relate to.
I know how you adjusted things.
Yeah,
so personal experience. But it was probably the most innovative and creative.
Yes, we had to
and really
pivot.
a courageous step.
Yes.
To be able to make sure there was no lack of continued services for these kids. So, how'd that come about?
That's a good question. I mean, listen, it's as you said, it's Corona hits, and all of a sudden, life becomes so challenging. And Hafter, who's been our home forever, they said, listen, at this time we can't accommodate. We fully understood. We had no expectations of being able to accommodate us. Mm-hmm. And so to know, I'm also in Teaneck and other areas all over the country.
Right.
So we had to figure out what to do. So we started over here, sitting down and saying, look, illness is not stopping.
Right.
Loss is unfortunately not stopping.
Right.
If anything, we have families here who lost parents from COVID. Mm-hmm. So need is great, and we can't just close up shop. So we need to figure out something, and we need to figure out something quickly. So what we decided to do is start to train these volunteers. First we had to interview, get the volunteers. Then we had to train them, and in order to be able to send them into their homes following COVID protocol, mm-hmm. and be able to mentor the kids there one-on-one.
So you needed much more staff than you usually have.
It's not just the staff, it's the training. It was an amazing amount, and each time we have to send them we send dinner to the homes. We're sending them with all sorts of our activities to make sure that they're able to connect with the kids. We have to then follow up with the mentors, with the families. How's it going? Make sure that everything's going well. It's kind of flipping everything on the side. We're watching from afar. I'm not able to be there all the time and watch. And then when it comes to situations in the family that we're working with, need case management, they need more therapy, they need more different challenges going on, that we have to have our finger on the pulse. Now, there's an interesting thing that also happened from that. I have people in the home. So I have firsthand, people are coming back and telling me, listen, I'm seeing certain challenges, mm-hmm. and you need to be aware of this, that we might not have been aware of mm-hmm. prior, because we were never necessarily in their homes. So we were able to now accommodate them. And in many ways, we're able to provide more services because we have that information. So this is definitely extraordinarily challenging. Take the Hanukkah. We usually make a big fancy Hanukkah party in Beth Shalom. Mm-hmm. We invite all the families, all of our drivers, hundreds of people.
So what's the plan?
So now we're going to do a drive-through. Essentially, we're going to have the families going to come. There's 20-minute slots mm-hmm. hopefully in Beth Shalom also, December 16th. They're going to get there, and we're going to have everything done for them during those 20-minute slots. They're going to get a dinner to go, they're going to get gifts, they're going to get gift cards, they're going to have we're going to have different entertainments and photo booths, etc., in and out. And then we're going to clean up a little, and then they're going to come in for the next one. And that's the goal. We hope to be able to do this. We have lots of families, over 25 families, to be able to get through here, right here, and it's going to be probably 80 kids.
So you have this,
more, actually.
You have this going on in Israel, too?
We have this going around the country, yeah. We have, in Israel, it's a bit different also, but it's a very similar program. In Antwerp, they have it also, but it's also a little different from a program, but it's also at Einstein. And that's the beauty. The really beauty is that it's a community program by the community for the community. So you can actually tweak it to fit the needs of that community. Like we said, the Chassidim, they need it a certain way. They do Shabbatons and different things. Over here, they need more homework help. I tell you, how many times I've heard from a family who will tell me, whatever homework you get done here is the homework they're going to get done. Mm-hmm. There's nobody home. Right. They're coming home to either maybe a bubby, if not, maybe a cleaning lady, and...
It's only twice a week.
Right. And, so the excellent question. When we see a real dire situation, a father is away for a bone marrow transplant.
Yeah.
A sibling is really, really going far away for treatment, or for that matter, parents are never home. we do our best to be able to provide for the other days, as much as we can.
Also in the home now?
Yeah, well, now, obviously, it's becoming a little more challenging because we're using so many volunteers on a constant basis. It's a little, usually we would use Monday volunteers and Wednesday volunteers. Now it's becoming much more challenging.
On a personal level, how does a professional like yourself, social worker, and it's true of medical doctors, nurses, considering what they've had to withstand in hospitals and nursing homes in the last 10 months, I mean, what you're dealing with now for years with these crises in the homes and the traumas and the kids acting up or reacting to whatever is taking place in their lives. Professionally, how do you maintain your sanity? is my question, I guess.
So you're already thinking I'm sane. That's your first step.
For the purposes of this
I'm
recording,
I'm kidding.
We'll assume that you're sane.
Thank God. I'm quite well. I appreciate it.
All right,
so I'll tell you.
Or any professional, how do they deal with it?
I can't answer for every professional. Every professional needs to have proper supervision, which means they have to have people that they can speak to, right? Mm-hmm. And if you have challenges, to be able to talk over with those challenges. You also have to be very grounded. And in my situation, I'm very grounded in that I start my day off very early. I make sure that I have not just my learning in and my davening in, but I have time to also process and to think. And once I'm able to get myself in the right state, I'm able to go through my day. But if I don't have that, and it's also extremely important to have a good Rebbe. Mm-hmm. Baruch Hashem, I'm very close to Moshe Weinberger, and
I get to talk these things.
Whenever I have real challenges that are beyond me, I definitely lean on him.
All right. So you did mention to me that aside from your extraordinary role you play in iShine, Chai Lifeline, that you're also in private practice.
Yeah.
So you're counseling people.
Yes.
And aside from the coronavirus, these are challenging times.
Yes, definitely.
Just make it, the virus just compounded a lot of things.
Oh, yeah.
And you're dealing, I imagine, exclusively in the Orthodox Jewish community, in the Frum community, what we call the Frum community. So, what are you seeing in 2020 that didn't exist or was unheard of 5 years ago?
I don't know if anything's unheard of 5 years ago. I think it just got exacerbated. In other words,
more of it, more widespread.
In other words, let's take anxiety, for instance. We've had anxiety challenges here for many years.
Okay.
But when you throw in something like Corona, which is extraordinarily anxiety-provoking.
So anxiety comes from what? Pressure, life pressure?
Well, here you have the unknown, the fear of the unknown. You have the people's whole stability, and what they relied on has been shaken. You have people that are now isolated who never were isolated before. You have people that are immunocompromised or are over a certain age that no longer can actually live the life that they've been living, and now they have certain fear. And the fear very much is not warranted. If you're over a certain age and you're immunocompromised, it's quite understandable that this is definitely not.
They're telling them that unfortunately they'll never be able to go outside again.
Right, they're saying, well, God willing, they will, but they're saying right now you have to be extra careful, and extra careful means that I have to tweak my life. And sometimes that means drastically. It means I can't necessarily see my grandkids. I can't necessarily see my children all the time. Depending where you are in life and how you are. So that creates a lot of, not just anxiety, but I don't know how to process this new life, and I'm overwhelmed. That's number one. Number two is that, a lot of relationships have been struggling prior to COVID. Whether it be a husband, wife, whether it be a father, son, mother, children to the parents. And what I've seen, and it's almost similar to illness, is that when you have, God forbid, illness or something, a tragedy happens, you either see people coming together and it really creates a cohesive unit, or you see things start to ripple and fall apart. And if there's a real base, a real foundation, so then, you can build on it, and you can go through struggles, and then it's okay to go through struggles. That's how we're created. But if it's not, then very often that might come to an explosion at some point, and very often it can become so overwhelming for people. I can't deal with this anymore.
So, what role are you saying that talking about it with a professional is a giant step in the direction of managing?
Well,
those types of anxieties?
I wouldn't say just talking about it. It's first getting to understand, what makes you tick. Understand yourself better. Understand where your thoughts are coming from, where your challenges are. find the reality that you live in, recognize how can I process it better? How can I be able to maybe get more coping skills? How can I get more on strengths and how do I recognize the different challenges that I'm in right now? Very often if I don't think necessarily and I just go through the day, things can come my way and I'm not reacting correctly until I have a moment to actually reflect. So it definitely helps to go to someone to speak, to be able to recognize yourself and get more in tune with yourself. The more in tune you are, the more you're able to work on it.
Well, basically in the last 10 months, our experts told us not to think.
Just follow.
Just to listen to them.
Yeah.
And if we think, we're dangerous, so better off not thinking. So that's
counterintuitive.
It's contradictory to what you think the best thing to
Well,
to
listen,
do is.
I do agree you have to follow medical advice. In other words, like we said a moment ago, if you're over a certain age and you're immunocompromised, it's not a wise idea now to go start hanging out, with other people. Right, exactly, at a bar till 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
Definitely not the best idea, but that's you should definitely follow medical advice. But at the same time, the well-being, what they are coming out now more and more, is that you have to realize that the well-being, the mental well-being, is so important. We can't just focus on just the illness alone. We have to recognize that it's making an impact.
Obviously we're out of time, but that's an important point, because throughout this business of trying to avoid the virus, which is the proper way to function, but the extent to which that our experts and our leadership, political and others, have guided us has neglected the consequences that come along with being isolated and not being in school and not having interaction with other people. And there are like the president used to say that there's an uptick in suicides and in drug abuse and in child abuse and in domestic violence, all because people are together more.
Yeah.
But I want to thank you very much for coming in.
Could we also just make one last mention before we leave?
Sure.
We have a very special honoree coming up.
Yes, of course. My daughter, Malky Gordon Hirsch, is one of the guests of honor at the December 8th at the Global Gala. And, she has great Akaras Tov to eye shine.
Project Klein.
They've impacted very dramatically on helping her out. She's a single mother, and she has 5 kids. Like I said at the beginning, the oldest is 13, the youngest is 3, and it's an interesting experience, to say the least. Unwanted, but it's here, and we're dealing with it.
And she has the support of her family. That's how she's able to
Yes,
continue.
of course, she has the support of her all her siblings and her parents, of course, and very good friends, and it's a Hashem, God has a plan, and as Rabbi Sachs, who passed away recently, said when he was asked why bad things happen to good people, they asked him if he has an explanation for it, and he said that he thinks he does. He thinks bad things happen to good people, and God does not want you to be able to understand it. So when you're not understanding it, you're fulfilling the divine will. So that's a source of comfort, for me, I think for others too. When you're puzzled and you can't figure out what's going on, that's the way it's supposed to be. Don't grapple with it. Don't drive yourself insane trying to make sense of things all the time. Andy Lauber.
Pleasure.
I shine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, so that's a wrap on our second episode of our podcast from the offices of the Five Towns Jewish Times. So thank you very much for joining us. This is Larry Gordon. Have a good day, everyone.